Well, after years of negotiations, a massive trade agreement between the EU and the South American Mercosur bloc appears close to the finish line. EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen arrived in Uruguay this week for final talks. The deal would create a huge new transatlantic market, but there have been objections in the EU, especially from farmers.
The trade agreement has always been controversial in Europe, and especially in France. French farmers have been protesting for weeks, fearing they could be overrun and undercut by agricultural imports from South America if the Mercosur deal were to be enacted. France, of course, cannot single-handedly hold the deal, but now Poland has also said it won't sign the current draft. Mercosur comprises Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay. Venezuela's membership is currently suspended. The bloc's joint economic product stands at $3 trillion. The 27 countries in the European Union add up to 18 trillion. Altogether, the Mercosur deal would impact 770 million people. The EU and the South American bloc have been talking for a quarter century. Meanwhile, China has massively increased its own trade with Mercosur. Now the pressure is on the EU to finally act. The situation is exacerbated as Donald Trump will become US president, and the EU needs to strengthen its own partnerships in the face of looming US tariffs. The current draft of the EU-Mercosur deal calls for 90% of tariffs between the two sides to be dropped. That would include tariffs on agricultural products like meat and soy, but also car parts that are being sent to the EU from South America, as well as cars, machines and chemicals being sold from the EU into Mercosur. Still, among the voices protesting the deal are environmentalists. They warn that South America's industry, which is not generally seen as sustainable and puts profits over the protection of the rainforest, could be fired up.
And to talk more about this, I'm joined in the studio now by DW reporter Jules Giesler. You've reported from South America for us. Can you tell us, there's a lot of countries involved in this. This is massive economies. So what is at stake here?
I think what is really important here to begin with is that if this deal finally will be ratified, we're talking about one of the biggest free trade zones created that would cover a market of almost 10% of the world's population. So this is massive. If we look now at the benefits that would have for the different regions, let's start with the Mercosur countries. So on one hand, what we see is they could export meat and grain and import it into the EU with lower trade barriers, something that has been criticized that we just had in the report from European farmers because they say they cannot compete with the prices because of lower environmental standards. If we look now at all the criticism aside from the EU, but if we look at what is the EU actually gaining from it or could be gaining from it, we do have three industries that would gain. It's the automobile industry, it's the chemical industry, and it's the pharma industry. But above all, it is important to notice that for the EU, what is really at stake is the access to raw materials that would be crucial for the green energy transition, like lithium, that is used in the creation of electric car batteries. And Argentina is holds the third largest reserves of the world.
So this comes at a time when President Trump is coming back into the White House in the US, and he's taking a very different approach, imposing tariffs on, or threatening tariffs on a lot of countries. And that's basically the opposite of what the EU is trying to achieve here, right?
Absolutely, and it's exactly Trump's protectionism on the one hand, and then China's looming trade war with the EU on the other hand, that is the EU kind of pushing towards a move or kind of creates a certain urgency now to finally seal this deal after 25 years in the making. So this is one thing, but then on the other hand, also South America, or China's role in South America is really important here, because we do see that China is South America's biggest trading partner, and we see that Chinese firms are the influence of Chinese firms are constantly growing on the continent. So there are even experts saying that if the EU does not seal this deal now, it would push South America closer to China when it comes to trade.
Okay. Well, Jules Giesler, DW reporter, thanks for talking with us.